When I hit that emergency shutdown at 3:17 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon, 120 industrial monitoring systems across the Houston Energy Corridor went dark. Safety alarms fell silent. Environmental sensors stopped reporting to EPA databases. Pipeline pressure monitoring froze mid-reading. 4 years and 6 months of flawless cybersecurity infrastructure died in the span of 5 seconds. And I watched it all happen from a corner booth at Denny's on Westheimer, drinking black coffee while Brandon Walsh's empire crumbled in real time on my laptop screen. But let me back up. My name is Michael Hoffman. I'm 54 years old and I've been running independent industrial cybersecurity consulting for 26 years. Ever since I got out of the Navy, where I spent 8 years protecting submarine networks from threats most people can't even imagine. Learned real quick that when your security systems fail in hostile waters, people don't just lose data, they die. I live in a decent 2-story house about 25 minutes west of downtown Houston. Got a workshop in the garage where I build custom security hardware. No flashy website, no LinkedIn posts about innovative solutions. My clients find me when their industrial networks are getting hammered by attacks and someone's career is on the line. That's how I ended up working with Apex Industrial Security Solutions 4 years and 6 months ago. Gary Reynolds, their operations director back then, called me on a Friday morning. His voice had that edge you hear when a man's looking at his entire operation going down the drain. Michael, we just failed our 3rd cybersecurity audit in 18 months. Insurance company is talking about pulling our coverage. EPA is breathing down our necks about monitoring compliance. I need someone who understands how this stuff actually works in industrial environments, not some consultant who learned security from a textbook. Gary was old school. Came up through the ranks when industrial control systems were mostly mechanical before everything got networked and vulnerable. He understood that behind every fancy dashboard, there's actual equipment that has to function in the real world with real consequences. When I walked into their facility that first day, the chaos was obvious. SCADA systems running on Windows XP with no patches. Industrial firewalls configured by someone who clearly didn't understand the difference between IT networks and operational technology. Environmental monitoring sending data over unencrypted connections that any script kiddie could intercept. We've got 5 different security vendors that don't coordinate with each other, Gary explained, walking me through the control room. Network monitoring uses one system, endpoint protection uses another, and our industrial protocols are basically running naked. Every time we try to update something, we break something else. I spent the next 20 months building them a real security infrastructure, not some off-the-shelf package that sort of works if you ignore the gaps. Custom industrial firewalls that understood Modbus and DNP3 protocols. Intrusion detection systems trained on the specific signature patterns of petroleum processing equipment. Real-time monitoring that tracked every sensor, every valve, every pipeline connection across 32 different facilities. 45,000 lines of custom code. Every security rule, every monitoring protocol, every hardware interface built from scratch and tested until it ran flawlessly. The results were immediate. 0 successful intrusions, no compliance violations. Insurance auditors came through twice after implementation and couldn't find a single vulnerability. Gary would send me detailed reports on threat prevention and cost savings. He understood what he was paying for, and more importantly, what he was getting. The contract was crystal clear. They leased operational access to my security infrastructure. I retained full ownership of all code, algorithms, and hardware. Gary signed it without hesitation because he understood the difference between using something and owning it. For over 4 years, everything ran perfectly. Monthly payments arrived on time. The system performed exactly as designed. Gary would call occasionally with questions about threat analysis or expansion possibilities, always respectful of the boundaries we'd established. Then Gary took early retirement. His wife had been diagnosed with something that required expensive treatments, and he wanted to spend time with her while the insurance was still good. I understood completely. My own wife had been dealing with some health issues lately. Nothing life-threatening, but the kind of ongoing treatments that insurance doesn't fully cover. Those medical bills add up fast when you're getting close to retirement age. Brandon Walsh arrived 3 weeks later with his MBA from Rice and his designer suits that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Mid-30s, everything polished, and the kind of confident smile people wear when they think technology is just another business problem to be optimized. His first email wasn't a greeting or an introduction. Subject line: Legacy System Optimization Review. The message was pure corporate speak about operational efficiency and third-party dependency elimination. My invoice hadn't changed in over 4 years. Same amount, same schedule, same scope of work. But Brandon saw a line item on a budget sheet and immediately assumed there was waste to be cut. Plus, I could tell from his tone that he saw me as some old guy who probably didn't understand modern DevOps methodologies. I replied politely, attaching the original contract and a brief summary of system performance metrics. Professional courtesy, nothing more. His response came back within 90 minutes. Need to schedule comprehensive review of all external service agreements. Please prepare documentation for internal assessment of security frameworks. Security frameworks. That phrase told me that. Everything I needed to know about Brandon Walsh. He was the kind of executive who thought complex industrial cybersecurity could be understood by reading bullet points on a slide deck. I started preparing, not documentation for his assessment, but the tools I'd need when this conversation went exactly where I knew it was heading. 3 days later, the email I'd been expecting arrived. Subject line: Security Package Requirements. Brandon requested a complete copy of the system for internal evaluation and potential transition planning. That's when I knew for certain he didn't want to review our service agreement. He wanted to steal my system and probably hand it over to some offshore team that would charge half my rate and understand none of the complexity. I drafted a response that was technically accurate and completely unhelpful. Happy to provide everything included under your current lease agreement. Then I opened my laptop, navigated to the administrative console that controlled every aspect of their operation, and started building Brandon Walsh's education in the difference between access and ownership. The lesson was about to begin. The next morning brought another email from Brandon. Subject line: Contract Clarification Request. He wanted to know whether the security infrastructure belonged to Apex Industrial Security Solutions. I screenshot the relevant contract clause and sent it back to him. Bold text, impossible to misinterpret. All system architecture, source code, and proprietary algorithms remain the sole property of Michael Hoffman. Licensed for operational use only. No transfer, no replication, no derivative works. Gary had understood that clause perfectly when he signed it. You don't buy a custom industrial security system like you're purchasing office software. You license access to infrastructure that took years to develop and requires ongoing expertise to maintain. 2 hours later, Brandon's response landed in my inbox. We will be transitioning to internal security solutions effective immediately. Thank you for your service. That was it. No discussion, no transition planning, no acknowledgement that he was about to disconnect the security backbone of their entire industrial operation. Just corporate speak for "you're fired and we're keeping your stuff." The thing is, my wife had been dealing with some health issues lately. Nothing life-threatening, but the kind of ongoing treatments that insurance doesn't fully cover. We'd been counting on this contract to carry us through until Medicare kicked in. Brandon's little cost-cutting exercise wasn't just professional disrespect, it was threatening our financial security at the worst possible time. I leaned back in my desk chair and looked out the window at my workshop. Inside that converted garage bay sat the master control server I'd built specifically for the Apex system. Custom hardware interface with dedicated processors for every major subsystem: environmental, monitoring, safety systems, pipeline controls, intrusion detection, all of it flowing through circuits I'd designed and assembled by hand. Brandon Walsh had no idea that Control Server existed. He thought the system was just software running on their computers. He was about to learn the difference between a user interface and actual infrastructure. 5 days after his termination email, a calendar invite appeared. Service transition discussion, Friday, 2 p.m. Central. No agenda, no context, just a meeting title that suggested he expected this to be a simple handoff conversation. I joined the video call 2 minutes early. Clean polo shirt, background showing my home office with my engineering license and Navy commendation certificates visible on the wall. Professional appearance, nothing flashy. Brandon logged in 4 minutes late, settling into his chair with that satisfied expression executives get when they think they've solved a complex problem with simple cost cutting. A woman from procurement joined next, Jennifer Morrison according to her screen name. Then a younger woman who looked barely out of college, Ashley Morrison, probably Jennifer's daughter based on the last name and the way she deferred to Jennifer's comments. Gary Reynolds was nowhere to be seen, not surprising. He'd probably advised against this entire approach, and Brandon had decided his old-school perspective wasn't relevant to modern business practices. "Michael, thanks for joining us," Brandon began, his tone suggesting this was just a routine administrative task. "We've made the decision to bring cybersecurity management in-house. We appreciate all your work up to this point, but we're ready to take control of operations internally." Take control. As if navigating through a security dashboard was the same thing as operating the underlying infrastructure. I kept my expression neutral. "You're terminating the lease agreement, is that correct?" "Correct." Brandon leaned back in his chair like he expected congratulations for his decisive leadership. "We'll need complete handover of all code, system configurations, and back-end credentials." "Standard transition process." Jennifer Morrison nodded approvingly. Ashley Morrison typed notes into what was probably a compliance checklist. They had this choreographed like a routine vendor termination. I didn't move. "You're not licensed to access the core infrastructure. Your agreement covers operational use of the system outputs. You never purchased ownership rights." Brandon's expression shifted slightly. "We paid for development of this system, Michael. That makes it our intellectual property. This is standard business practice." I leaned forward slightly. "You paid for access to a functioning security network. You never bought the underlying technology. That distinction is clearly outlined in Section 7 of your contract." He glanced away from the camera, probably pulling up the contract on another screen. I waited while he scanned through language that Gary Reynolds had reviewed carefully with their legal team 4 years ago. "Look," he said, attempting to regain control of the conversation. "We understand there might be some technical complexities here, but we're prepared to handle operations internally going forward. Just send us whatever files you have so we can maintain continuity. I'll provide everything you're legally entitled to receive," I replied. Nothing more. The silence stretched across the video call. Jennifer Morrison looked uncomfortable. Ashley Morrison stopped typing. Brandon's jaw tightened as he realized this wasn't going to be the simple asset transfer he'd planned. "That'll be fine," he said finally, trying to end the call quickly. "We'll expect delivery by close of business tomorrow." I didn't respond immediately, just sat there looking directly into the camera while he fumbled with his mouse, clearly wanting to disconnect before I could complicate his timeline further. The screen went black, and I closed my laptop. Brandon Walsh thought he understood cybersecurity because he could navigate software interfaces and read quarterly reports about threat prevention. He had no comprehension of the physical infrastructure, the custom hardware, or the specialized knowledge required to keep it all functioning. He was about to get an education. I walked out to my workshop and powered up the master control server. Every status light showed green, environmental sensors synchronized, safety monitoring updating in real time, intrusion detection flowing smoothly through the network, the Houston energy corridor running exactly as I designed it to run. Then I started building Brandon's transition package, professional-looking documentation with clean diagrams and impressive technical terminology, user interface screenshots showing dashboard layouts and threat analysis panels. Everything polished and official-looking and completely useless without access to the underlying control systems. I spent the rest of the afternoon creating the kind of deliverable Brandon expected to receive. Visual materials that would make him think he'd gotten exactly what he needed to run the operation independently. Interface mock-ups with animated displays. System diagrams that showed the logical flow of security operations. All of it disconnected from the actual infrastructure. By 6 p.m., I had a professional-looking package ready for delivery. I attached it to an email with a single line of explanation. Security interface documentation provided per contract termination. No back-end access included. I hit send and watched the message disappear into corporate email systems, where Brandon Walsh would soon discover the difference between owning a steering wheel and owning the engine. Then I walked back out to my workshop, sat down at the master control server, and placed my hand on the emergency shutdown switch. The real lesson was about to begin. The next morning, I drove to Denny's like it was any other Wednesday, ordered my usual black coffee, and settled into the corner booth where I could see the parking lot through the window. The waitress had been serving me the same order for 2 years. She nodded, poured the coffee, and left me alone with my laptop. I opened the administrative console and brought up the main monitoring dashboard. Every indicator showed green. Environmental data flowing smoothly through 120 sensor networks. Safety systems operating within normal parameters across 32 industrial facilities. Pipeline monitoring cycling efficiently through 15 different petroleum processing plants. Everything Brandon Walsh thought he now controlled was actually flowing through the custom server sitting in my workshop 25 minutes away. At 3:15 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text message from Brandon. Having trouble accessing root security console. Can you provide admin credentials? I stared at the message for about 15 seconds, then deleted it without responding. He was probably sitting in some conference room with his team, trying to figure out why their new internal security solutions weren't connecting to anything real. At 3:17 p.m., I initiated the emergency shutdown sequence. The monitoring dashboard froze instantly. Every green indicator went gray. Real-time sensor feeds dropped to 0. Safety system communications stopped mid-transmission. The entire Houston Energy Corridor security network just stopped functioning. I took a slow sip of coffee and watched 4 years and 6 months of perfect cybersecurity coordination die in complete silence. The system didn't crash or throw error messages. I'd designed it to fail gracefully. No alarms, no warning lights, no dramatic shutdown sequences, just clean disconnection from all operational monitoring. If someone tried to restart the user interface, it would load perfectly and display cached data, creating the illusion that everything was still working. But underneath, nothing was actually communicating with anything else. For the first 12 minutes, nothing appeared wrong to casual observation. The dashboard still showed normal status indicators. Operations staff looking at their screens would see regular environmental readings and safety parameters, but no new data was flowing anywhere. At 3:29 p.m., I watched the first compliance violation register. A petroleum processing plant's emissions monitoring had gone silent, creating an automatic EPA reporting failure. Their insurance company would be notified within hours. By 3:45 p.m., the ripple effects became visible. Safety systems showing green status but not actually monitoring pipeline pressures. Environmental sensors displaying normal readings but not updating with current data. The difference between appearing secure and being secure was about to become very expensive. My phone started ringing at 4:02 p.m. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call. Then a third. The panic was beginning. I pulled up the system impact calculator I'd built into my monitoring tools. Conservative estimate, $95,000 in daily losses from compliance violations, missed safety checks, and insurance premium adjustments. Real number was probably higher once you factored in regulatory fines and operational disruptions. By 4:30 p.m., I had 23 missed calls and 16 unread voicemails. The Houston Energy Corridor was experiencing what the military would call a cascading systems failure. Critical infrastructure was running blind, and somewhere in a corporate office building, Brandon Walsh was probably staring at user interface screens that still showed everything functioning normally. At 4:38 p.m., an emergency calendar invite arrived. Critical system failure, immediate response required. 5 p.m. Central. No polite corporate language this time, just panic in all caps. I closed my laptop and ordered another cup of coffee. The education phase was complete. Now came the negotiation. At 4:58 p.m., I joined the emergency video call from my car in the Denny's parking lot. Professional appearance, calm demeanor, using my phone's camera with the restaurant's exterior visible in the background. Nothing fancy, just a working consultant responding to a client emergency. The screen filled with stressed executives in various stages of crisis management. Dennis Coleman, some kind of senior VP, led the discussion. Tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, the look of a man who'd spent the last hour in emergency meetings trying to figure out why their entire security infrastructure had gone dark. Legal counsel joined next, 2 attorneys looking like they'd been pulled out of other meetings. Ryan Foster, the current operations supervisor, appeared looking exhausted but unsurprised. Former military background, he understood when systems were seriously compromised. Brandon Walsh was already in the call when I connected, positioned in a small window at the bottom of the screen, muted microphone, body language that suggested he'd been excluded from leadership of his own crisis. "Michael, we've got a serious situation here," Dennis began without pleasantries. "Our entire monitoring infrastructure appears to be offline. Environmental compliance is failing. Insurance carriers are asking questions. We need immediate restoration." I nodded once. "Your lease agreement was terminated yesterday. Emergency restoration services are available under separate terms." The legal counsel leaned forward. "What kind of terms are we discussing? Payment due via wire transfer before reactivation. Rate is 3 times standard monthly fee for emergency response. 48-hour service window. Complete acknowledgement of intellectual property ownership. Ryan Foster spoke up. Michael, we've got EPA violations accumulating by the hour. Insurance coverage could be suspended if we don't restore monitoring by tomorrow morning. This isn't just about money anymore. Then you'll want to move quickly on the wire transfer, I replied. Brandon finally unmuted. This is unreasonable. You're holding critical infrastructure hostage over a contract dispute. I looked directly at his camera window. You terminated my services and demanded ownership of infrastructure you never purchased. I'm providing exactly what emergency restoration costs under these circumstances. Dennis cut off whatever Brandon was about to say. We need 10 minutes to discuss internally. They clicked into a breakout room, leaving me alone in the virtual waiting area. I sat in my car watching the evening traffic on Westheimer, thinking about how we'd gotten to this point. 26 years of building a reputation based on reliability and technical expertise, and some MBA who'd been on the job for 3 weeks thought he could just take it all and hand it over to cheaper alternatives. The thing is, you can't shortcut experience. You can't offshore institutional knowledge, and you definitely can't steal custom-built security infrastructure and expect it to keep working without the person who designed it. 10 minutes later, they returned to the main call. Dennis looked like a man who'd just had a very uncomfortable conversation with his board of directors. Legal is initiating the wire transfer now. Should complete within 30 minutes. Let me know when it hits my account, I said. 22 minutes later, my banking app chimed with an incoming transfer notification. Payment confirmed, amount correct, emergency service fee fully paid. 3 times my regular monthly rate, enough to cover my wife's treatments for the next 6 months and put us back on track for retirement savings. I walked back into Denny's, opened my laptop, and remotely accessed the master control server in my workshop. With a few keystrokes, I brought all systems back online. Every monitoring station across the Houston energy corridor came back to life like someone had just restarted the nervous system of the entire industrial complex. Environmental sensors resumed reporting. Safety systems reconnected. Pipeline monitoring picked up exactly where it had left off. 4 hours of downtime erased in less than 30 seconds. Systems restored, I announced when I returned to the video call. All monitoring operations functional. Dennis nodded. We appreciate the rapid response. I appreciate payment in advance, I replied evenly. The call ended without ceremony. No thank you from Brandon, no acknowledgement of what had just happened. Just a bunch of executives who'd learned the hard way that cutting costs on critical infrastructure comes with consequences. 2 weeks later, a new contract arrived from Rebecca Parker, VP of Strategic Operations. Someone brought in specifically to handle the aftermath without Brandon Walsh's name appearing anywhere in the correspondence. The offer was substantial: 5-year exclusive agreement, enhanced compensation, comprehensive intellectual property protections, professional language, respectful tone, no mention of optimization or cost-cutting. The new terms were actually better than what I'd had with Gary Reynolds. Higher monthly fee, guaranteed annual increases, explicit protection for all custom development work. Most importantly, clear language that acknowledged the difference between licensing operational access and transferring ownership. I read through it twice, then signed every page exactly as written. Brandon Walsh's signature was nowhere to be found. According to the organizational chart attached to the new contract, he'd been reassigned to Special Projects Coordination, corporate speak for being exiled to irrelevance. Word travels fast in industrial cybersecurity circles. By the end of the month, I'd received inquiry calls from companies in Dallas, Beaumont, and Louisiana, all asking the same basic question: are you available for security infrastructure projects? They'd heard about Houston. They knew what happened when someone tried to steal custom security systems from a Navy cybersecurity specialist who understood the difference between using something and owning it. More importantly, they understood that cheap alternatives in cybersecurity usually end up being very expensive mistakes. That reputation was worth more than any marketing I could have purchased. At 54, with my wife's treatments covered and our retirement savings back on track, I finally had the leverage to choose only the clients who understood what they were actually paying for. 6 months later, I was sitting in my workshop looking at 3 different contract offers from major petroleum companies, all of them willing to pay premium rates for custom security infrastructure, all of them respectful of intellectual property ownership, All of them understanding that when your industrial networks are under constant attack, you want the person who built your defenses to stay invested in keeping them working. I've learned a lot of things in 26 years of cybersecurity consulting, but the Houston situation taught me the most important lesson of all. Technical expertise isn't just about solving problems. It's about building relationships with people who understand the value of what you bring to the table. Gary Reynolds understood that. He respected the work and the expertise required to do it right. Brandon Walsh saw line items on a budget sheet and thought everything could be optimized away. The difference between those two approaches cost Apex Industrial Security Solutions about $200,000 in direct losses, and probably twice that in long-term insurance premium increases. For me, it was the best business education I ever received. Sometimes the most expensive lessons teach the most valuable skills. These days, when potential clients ask about my approach to contracts and intellectual property, I tell them about Houston, not as a threat, but as an explanation of why certain boundaries exist and why respecting them benefits everyone involved. Most people understand. The ones who don't probably weren't going to be good clients anyway. In business, there's a crucial difference between being respected for what you know and being dismissed for what someone thinks they can replace. And that difference usually becomes expensive for the people who guess wrong. After 30 years in any field, you learn that the real value isn't just in solving problems, but in building the kind of reputation where people understand that trying to shortcut your expertise costs more than paying for it properly.